In the last episode, we followed the receipts to a number too large to be safe, the enormous markup on nutmeg, a spice that grew in only one place on Earth. And we ended on a hard idea that a monopoly worth that much is worth, to the men chasing it, almost any price. This episode is about who paid it. It is a sober one, and it should be. We are going to tell what happened on the Banda Islands in the year 1621 plainly and carefully and without spectacle, because the facts do not need any. This is the part of the story the company did not put in its annual report. Before 1621, the Banda Islands were not empty. They were home to a people, the Bandanese, who had lived there for generations and who had been trading their nutmeg for far longer than any European had known the islands existed. They were merchants in their own right. For centuries, they had sold their spice to traders from across Asia, to Javanese, to Malays, to Arab and Indian and Chinese merchants, on their own terms, to whoever offered the best deal. The Bandas were a free market, run by the people who lived there. Historians put their number at perhaps 15,000 people. We should be honest that figures from 4 centuries ago are estimates, not a census, but that is the order of it. 15,000 or so, living on a few islands, sitting, without knowing it, on the only nutmeg supply in the world. And that was the problem. A free market was exactly what the company could not allow. The VOC did not arrive in 1621 as strangers. They had been pressing the Bandanese for years, trying to force them to sign exclusive contracts, to sell their nutmeg only to the Dutch and to no one else, at prices the company set. To the Bandanese, this was absurd. They had always sold to everyone. So they signed when pushed, and then went on trading with other buyers, the English and Asian merchants, exactly as they always had. To them, that was simply commerce. To the company, it was a breach of contract, again and again. There was another reason the leak mattered so much. The Dutch were not the only Europeans circling the Bandas. The English, too, had won footholds on a couple of the smaller islands and were buying nutmeg there. Competitors landing rival cargoes, exactly the thing that, as we saw last episode, could crack the price. To the company, every Bandanese boat that sold to an Englishman was profit walking out the door. And so the directors in Amsterdam reached the conclusion their own arithmetic had been pushing them toward since the first episode of this series. As long as the Bandanese were free, the monopoly leaked. The only way to close it completely was to take the islands themselves. The man who carried that decision out was the VOC's Governor-General in the Indies, Jan Pieterszoon Koen. Koen was the company's most effective servant and its most ruthless. He believed, and wrote, that trade could not be had without war, and war could not be had without trade, that the two were one thing. He had pressed the directors for years to deal with the Bandas by force, and he had grown impatient with their hesitation. To him, the contracts the Bandanese kept breaking were not a misunderstanding between two peoples with different ideas of trade. They were defiance. And defiance, in Koen's mind, was to be answered without mercy. He saw the Bandas not as a home to 15,000 people, but as an obstacle between the company and the richest monopoly on earth. In 1621, he sailed to the Bandas with a fleet, with soldiers, and with hired mercenaries, to settle the question of the islands for good. What followed was the destruction of the Bandanese people. We will state it plainly because it deserves to be stated plainly and not dressed up. In the conquest of 1621, the great majority of the population of the Banda Islands was killed, taken away in chains to be enslaved, or driven from their homeland to die elsewhere or scatter. The leaders of the islands were executed. The community that had traded that spice for centuries was, in a matter of months, effectively wiped from the land. Of perhaps 15,000 people, only a small fraction were still on the islands when it was over. The rest were dead, enslaved, or gone. Historians today do not soften what this was. Many describe it directly as a genocide, a corporate genocide, carried out not by a king or a crusade, but by a company in pursuit of a trade. We are not going to dwell on the manner of the deaths. The number and the word are enough. And here's the part that tells you exactly what it was for. With the Bandanese gone, the islands did not go quiet. The VOC carved the land into plantations. They called them perken and handed them out to Dutch settlers and company men to run. The nutmeg groves were too valuable to leave idle. They simply needed someone to work them. So the company brought in enslaved people from elsewhere in the Indies and beyond to labor on the very islands whose own population it had just destroyed. The nutmeg kept flowing. The monopoly, at last, was complete. And the markup we measured last episode now belonged, top to bottom, to one company alone. That is the receipt of 1621. A free people erased, their land turned into plantations, worked by the enslaved, and in exchange, a Dutch corporation secured the sole supply of the world's most profitable spice and held it for the better part of 2 centuries. It was, in the cold language of the company, a success. It is, in any honest accounting, one of the darkest entries in the whole ledger of the corporation, and it is the price that the second episode warned was coming, paid in full, by people who never agreed to the bargain. The company now owned its monopoly outright. Next, we watch it do something stranger still, not just conquer a trade, but found and govern a city of its own. The VOC got what it came for. The richest monopoly in the world, locked shut, held by force. The numbers in Amsterdam looked magnificent, but the receipts behind those numbers, in 1621, were written in the destruction of a people. History audits both columns, the profit and the cost. And this cost does not fade because the spice was sweet. We have stated it plainly, as we said we would. The account here is grave, and it stays open. Tareekh ka Hisaab, history, audited. Hisaab abhi baki hai.